David Hale from ESPN. The anger index is awesome. It makes great points. It shows the committee to be, maybe not really that interested in digging through all of the data. David Hale joins us on the Adam Gold Show. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm just lovely. How are you?
Hey, fantastic. I wouldn't say lovely, but I appreciate that that you are.
I'm trying to put a positive spin on things. I'm 6 beers deep. I'm just sitting in the dark.
It's that kind
slowly.
of a dark Thursday. That's good. The handicap from a playoff perspective. The top 3 teams in the ACC. Miami's in the driver's seat, right? Can they afford another loss?
Not in the regular season. I think there is a scenario in which they lose in the ACC championship game if they're not embarrassed in that game. If you look where they are now, there's going to be a lot of attrition around. Like, there's 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5. That just is not sustainable.
Right.
So, look, the Georgia Tech loss is not great, and it particularly is problematic because they had so many near disasters before that. It's certainly not a worse loss than what Notre Dame has, but Notre Dame wasn't flirting with disaster in every other game. So I think there's a perception that Miami is sort of a paper tiger here, and that's one of the problems. So they need to show that they belong, especially over these next couple of games that frankly they should win pretty easily. I think they could probably lose depending on what else happens, but their best path obviously is to win out, and I think they certainly have. I think if they're going to lose or SMU is going to lose, Miami has the higher chance of getting into the playoff. I think if SMU loses another game, it's going to be hard for them. I don't think it should be as hard as it is for them, but I think that the committee has pretty clearly said we don't really believe in SMU.
Does Clemson have a path to the playoff without winning the ACC championship?
Maybe, but they have 2 problems right now. One is that they don't have any good wins.
Right.
The 2 losses are the only 2 good teams that they've played, statistically speaking. And then Pitt might have been a good win if they could win this game, and certainly there's no guarantees that they will, but Pitt has sort of fallen over its own shoelaces. So that doesn't really count. So now you're kind of hoping that the South Carolina game can be sort of a difference maker.
Mm-hmm.
Look, if Clemson's at 10-2 at the end of the year, if they have a win over South Carolina, and South Carolina is ranked at the time, which is still a big if. I think there's certainly a case because they've got the brand recognition that they'll be given sort of the benefit of the doubt. And a lot of the underlying advanced metrics, the SP Plus and stuff like that, are relatively high on Clemson. I just, from an observer standpoint, like they had a couple of games where the offense just clicked and everything looked easy. But aside from that, you've not really seen a complete game out of Clemson yet this year on both sides of the ball, and a lot of it has looked not pretty. And I don't know that we can give Clemson the benefit of the doubt that they've turned a corner when we've all lived through the last 3 years.
No, I think you're right. I don't think this year's Clemson, and maybe based on the last couple, they have not earned that benefit of the doubt. It's not like they play in the Big Ten where it doesn't matter if you haven't beaten anybody good, Indiana and Penn State. You get the benefit of the doubt based on your win-loss record. It is funny that they tout strength of schedule and who you played, and those 2 schools are 4th and 5th. I'm sorry, Penn State is 4th and Indiana is 5th, inexplicably, with no losses, Indiana, in their ranking, and they have beaten combined Illinois, and who did Indiana beat? That's any good?
Michigan is their best win.
Does that count?
Michigan is not good.
No.
Yeah. And look, this is sort of the inherent problem too, is even like the quasi good teams in the Big Ten, your Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, like they're mostly just good defenses. They don't really have a way of beating you. They can just sort of drag you down to their level. And it is odd that somehow this is just not talked about. And look, Indiana's a great story. Like Kurt Signetti, Curtis Rourke, like that's a great story, and I don't want to take away from that. Like if roles were reversed and it was any other team, I'd be saying like let's celebrate them. That's great, and certainly if we were still at a 4-team playoff scenario and Indiana was undefeated at the end of the year and was not going to get a chance to get into the playoff because they hadn't played anybody, I'd say that was ridiculous. But we're in a 12-team scenario where they're not going to get left out if they go undefeated, and they've not played anybody. And I don't understand why we're not talking about this.
I neither do I, and I'm blown away. Look, I asked Chip Patterson. I asked him yesterday if Indiana loses by 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns at Ohio State, are they in the playoff? And there was hesitation. But why would they possibly be 5th? Is it because they were lower on the pecking order last week and people criticized them? Like, I don't understand some of the teams that they have completely ignored. You point out Arizona State basically looks exactly like some of the other teams with 2 losses that are still in their ranking. They look exactly like Colorado, only they're not coached by Deion Sanders. Actually, they probably look better than Colorado, but they're not coached by Deion Sanders. And they're not even in their top 25.
Yeah. No, look, if you gave Indiana SMU's schedule, I think they'd probably be at exactly the same place. Maybe worse, but they'd probably have a loss. Now, I don't like to play this would have happened or should have happened game. I think if you win your games, you deserve a chance. I agree with this. But, like, why is there no belief in SMU? Like, Indiana is the worst Power 5 program going back 30 years. There is no track record of success. This is their first ever 10-win season. Like, I get it. Chris McNetty's done a wonderful job there. It's impressive. But, like, is it that impressive? They haven't beaten anybody. Like, why? I don't understand that there's sort of just this cursory, they must be good. Like, we spent last year talking about how Florida State, a blue blood brand, might not actually be that good despite winning all their games and having actually beaten good teams. And now Indiana, it's just like, of course Indiana's good. They're in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it baffles me that we have 4 teams in the ranking top 5, right, from the Big Ten. Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana all in the top 10. And Ohio State, who is Ohio State's best win?
Penn State. And Penn State
That's right.
Nobody.
And Penn State hasn't beaten anybody. And we really do not know. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Ohio State if they don't do well in the college football playoff. I know Ryan Day has certainly come under some fire out there. Are you also surprised? Because I was blown away by it. I get it. They've lost. They lost at Ole Miss and they lost at Alabama. That Georgia. First of all, when Paul Feinbaum called it a travesty, I looked at the calendar. I'm like, we're 3 weeks away from this ranking mattering at all. Nothing is a travesty at this point. I think that the committee is just saying, well, who cares? It's the second week of the playoff, the fake brackets. Let's have some fun. I believe they do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, when we were in the 4-team era, they basically ranked their top 6 and then threw everything into a hat and pulled out names, because it didn't matter. And that's, I think, largely where this is too. Look, again, if Georgia's going to play Penn State, I'd probably have Georgia favored by at least a touchdown. We know this. That's, again, what you do on the field has to matter. You win your games or you lose your games, that has to matter. That has to be the number one metric. I hate to get too far away from that because I fully believe that you are what your record is. But it is funny that sort of the Big Ten is enjoying the fruits of what sort of the SEC had for quite a while, which was 4 or 5 real good teams and utter trash after that. And so the good teams really got to sit back and bask in the glow of being good. The SEC, I made this analogy. The SEC this year basically is like what the Pac-12 was before, except they don't have consequences or shame as a result of it. We shamed the hell out of the Pac-12 for beating up on each other, but they're beating up on each other. A 3-loss South Carolina is a really darn good football team, but it's when you're playing, like, if you look at Bill Connolly's SP Plus metrics, 9 of the top 17 teams are SEC teams. You can argue with that. I'm not saying that, like, mark that down in stone, but it goes to show you half of that league is basically a top 25 caliber team.
Yes.
So every other game that you're playing is against the top 25 team. Nobody else has to deal with that. And so I'm not saying free passes for everybody in the SEC, but it is a really good league. And Georgia has 2 relatively close home losses to 2 top 10 teams, and we're like, not a playoff team. It's a weird dynamic to be making that argument.
Yeah, and they have decided that Texas is the best SEC team.
And they've played the fewest good teams.
Right, exactly. It's just absolutely bizarre. Like, I give them credit for scheduling Michigan. You get credit for that.
Yeah,
right.
Agreed.
But
and they housed Michigan.
Right, and they did. But at the end of the day, as it turns out, Michigan isn't that good. So while you give them credit, and maybe that is benefit of the doubt territory, you can't give them that much credit for the win because it's against a team that isn't all that great. I don't give Penn State's best non-conference game is West Virginia. Indiana's best non-conference game is against Kansas, which was preseason in the top 25, but no good. And I'm sorry, it's Kansas. You don't get a ton of credit for scheduling Kansas because Kansas and Indiana probably looked at each other 5 years ago and said, "Hey, let's play each other. We'll get credit
to win a game." That's
right. We'll get credit for playing a Power 5 team back in the day. It's like when you schedule Duke, and all of a sudden you go, "Oh my gosh, Duke's good." Like, we can't do that. We can't schedule a team that's good in those leagues. So it is. I don't believe. I've said this for years, David Hale. We'll close on this. I don't believe the committee really cares who you play. I think they only cares what your win-loss record is and, as it turns out, your neighborhood. And if you live in the Big Ten, you're automatically elevated. It doesn't matter. We did this for how many decades with Wisconsin and Iowa when they weren't really that good because they didn't beat anybody good. But, man, they had good records.
Well, and look, 2 things that I'll say on this. I agree with you to some extent. That's certainly how it's played out this year, is that record trumps everything else for the most part. But it is my biggest complaint going back 11 years now is that the logic only holds for so long. You use that logic when you're talking about this team, and you use completely different logic when you're talking about another team. Like, again, SMU's record should have it higher than where it is. So it's very frustrating to me that there's not like a standard, like, here's our priority list. It's pick and choose what you want to prioritize based on the team that you want to rank here. And that there's no system to that. And then the other thing is, and I know people have mentioned this, and I am in no way suggesting like Ward Manuel is manipulating the committee or anything like that. Certainly Boo Corrigan didn't do it last year for FSU.
He did not.
But the bottom line is when you have acting ADs who have a vested interest in the success or failure of teams in their own conference because of the payouts for these games, like, there is a conflict of interest there, even when it's not the, like, that's my school, I work for that school conflict of interest. And it's mind-boggling that we allow acting ADs to sit on this committee and determine who gets to be in the playoff and who's ranked where. Like, it's so patently ridiculous, and yet it's almost like we take it as for granted that this is. Of course, we do that. Why wouldn't we?
Right, because it's college sports.
It's the beauty of college football because everything is stupid.
Yeah, it's because it's college sports. It is as we say par for the course. David Hale at a David Hale joint on Twitter. Always good to catch up, my friend. I appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Good talking to you.
You too.